This is only the third one, Fred, so I'm still learning on the job.
No worries.
I think we're always learning on the job.
I'm a weird hybrid guest, too, so we're...
You ready?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. Welcome to Poor Decisions, a podcast about craft beverages from an insider's point of view. Our primary focus is wine made in the Midwest, but topics, especially today, will include other craft beverages and products. Basically, anything that can pour is fair game. I'm Brian Lesbrunts, the host, 13-year veteran of the Michigan wine industry, dad of two, cyclist, skier, Michigan wine fan, Michigan beer fan, craft beverage fan of all sorts. So I am super excited today to be joined by, I think it's safe to say, one of the OGs of the Michigan craft industry. Also happens to be our next door neighbor. So I've got Fred Bueltmann here from a lot of stuff, but currently Fred runs a nonprofit called the Red Horse Center?
You got it.
Okay, got it. But he has been around starting his career in 1995. So again, when I say OG, I mean it. And we're going to go through his background a lot as we go forward through this special podcast today. But needless to say, we're going to try to get some good historical perspective from Fred, but also some ideas of where he sees things going as he's been through it all, so to speak. So Fred, welcome to the show today. Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So let's just dive right in. You know, you are my first non-wine specific guest, although having been your neighbor now for 13 years, I know you do enjoy a glass of wine every now and again and know your way around a winery pretty well. But why don't you just take us back a little bit through your history and how you found yourself into this craft beverage world?
Well, it's a funny path how I got into craft beverages. It starts before anyone was using the word craft. And I had not pointed myself towards this direction at all. I was really a music school dropout trying to find my way through paying my way through music school. And I did start home brewing, and I had some interest in unique beers. And one of my best friends and homebrewing partner, kind of through not really an intentional path, but through a family connection, got an interview for Guinness Import Company. And he got hired to be a regional representative for Pilsner Urquell, which happened to be our favorite beer at the time. And so that was this, for him, it was a big leap into the industry. For us and for me, it was this little window peek in. And, trying to keep it a little bit short, but basically he encouraged me to get to apply for a job at one of his distributors. So they buy the beer from the importer and then sell it to the accounts, bars and stores and restaurants. This is all based in Chicago. So at the time I was tending bar at the Hyatt Regency, playing gigs and just trying to figure it out. And the Hyatt Regency had given me a window into the import and specialty market. And this distributor sold all specialty imports. There wasn't really micro/craft focused distributors at the time. This is 91. There were a few breweries around that existed, like Lakefront in Milwaukee and Bell's in Kalamazoo, and Chicago Brewing in Chicago. Not many. And long story short, I talked my way into that job, had no experience, started selling all these crazy beers from all over the world. And I was really compelled by the role of being kind of an advocate for these beers that had unique flavors, unique backgrounds and stories, and largely overlooked in a lot of places. So places that had concepts about their big beer or liquor or wine selection were good customers, but most of the regular spots, like, bars had 3 tap handles and they were 2 light beers and a Guinness maybe, or 3 light beers. And it's just a totally different market than today. And I really grew attached to that role of being an ambassador for the potential and for these unsung styles of beer. And I hadn't intended to go this deep into the trail, but we're here. And I was there for 2 years, and I had ruled out business as enemy of creativity. And I was a creative that was hell bent on a career in professional music and the arts. And this was the first thing that didn't seem like a sellout to consider. It was the first thing that showed me business is also creative and is even a vehicle for the creatives. So like the idea of finding interesting ways to communicate with people, finding the unique, finding what was going to fit here, finding what somebody needed to know for this to be interesting. All that felt like the same idea as music, is expressing ideas and making things better. And so it really was the part that said, I can consider other things. I don't have to be as hardcore about this. And so off we went. I got a job. So 2 years into that, I applied for a regional position at an importer selling German beer. Totally underqualified, not old enough, not enough experience, didn't have the requisite degrees. Talked my way into that job, and I got handed a map for 9 states managing Warsteiner, a German Pilsner. And that really was an education and a deeper education in the industry side of things. And then along that way, I met Larry Bell. We shared the same distributor, so his beer is being sold through the same distributor that mine was in Chicago. And we became fast friends with a couple other folks, and we had this little friendly unit that would commiserate and strategize and connect with each other. And so it took a couple of years. He did not have a sales manager at that point. It was all being represented and handled by him. And so 2 short years later, in the spring of 95, I became the first sales manager for Bell's, based out of Kalamazoo, Michigan, which was Kalamazoo Brewing at the time. So that's probably a good starting point of like, how did I get into this? Well, it was partly through this creative lens that got introduced to something, to representing something that I loved, which was beer. And then a whole domino effect started, and I understood beer to be even more wildly complex and creative than I had previously thought.
Poor Decisions is presented by Fen Valley Consulting Services. Fen Valley Services is a specialized division of Fen Valley Vineyards dedicated to providing expert winery management and consulting services. With over 50 years of industry experience, we help farmers, winemakers, and wine marketers build successful, sustainable businesses. As a trusted winery management company, we offer customized, consultative solutions tailored to the unique needs of each client. Whether you need assistance with winery or tasting room operations, complete winemaking services, e-commerce support, or something else wine-related, our team of experts provides the experience and hands-on support needed to elevate your winery's success. Learn more at www.fenvalley.com. All right, no, there's a lot. This is the thing I love about this show already. As being the host, is I get all these different rabbit holes to go down, and because I want to, but I don't think anyone's going to listen to 4-hour episodes. I got to like pick a couple of them. But
yeah,
it's interesting to me. There's 2 things that really popped out from the sort of the early history, because I know there's more to go. Because you didn't end your career as the sales manager for Bell's.
Yes,
in a lot of ways that was in a lot of ways the beginning of it. But a couple of things in terms of your early history. You know, you're the second of 3 guests now who is a musician as well. And I'm not sure if this is going to be a trend that continues, but at this pace, this show could turn into a music show as soon as it is a craft beverage show. I'm curious, you alluded to some of the parallels, but it seems to me that there are quite a few parallels between music and craft beverage.
I think absolutely. And I think nationally there is a trend. And I recall, I don't know exactly when, but I remember coming across that in some of the interviews that I've done. And just, I became really connected to the national and regional conferences, and the collegiality and the networking of our industry is a particular passion of mine. And so I got to meet a lot of people that were different parts of breweries and distilleries and wineries. And I think there's a huge parallel. It'd be interesting to study at some point, but the number of artists from any medium, but especially the performing arts that end up in the beverage and really just the maker space, I think is really strong. And that's because there are parallels of like, I want to see an idea. It's people who are connected to this, I think, arc of being able to have a theoretical idea in their head, and then the path of taking that from conception of idea to something tangible that's creating an experience for people. That's very much a creative artist's loop of gratification and of purpose. And I think makers of all kinds are just doing that through a different medium that might have a little better commerce structure to it than the performing arts.
Yeah, and fermented beverages would fit into that bucket. You know, that's a great segue, because the one thing you said really resonated with me, which was the idea that at some point in your journey early on, you recognize that business can be creative, and that the way that you connect with the consumer, you know, they vote with their wallets so often. As much as people tell you that they love something or that they hate something, there's no better way to really get feedback than to see if they'll buy it from you, right? And, and it really helps focus your energy on what is truly important to your customer. And I know when I started here at Fenn Valley, 13 years ago or so, at first I thought I just like to do business. You know, that was my background, software business development, and basically my job was to understand what consumers were willing to pay for. And I learned early on in my career there that software engineering is a lot more art than it is science too. I mean, you have to have the scientific background to understand code base and how machines work. But at the end of the day, you're solving problems, and the more creatively you can solve them, there's usually simplicity and creativity, right? And so, and the fact that you become attached to the way that you've chosen to solve a problem. So I found, walking down the halls of a software engineering wing was more like walking down, the halls of an art studio than it was what I would originally have thought was kind of how an engineering firm would work. And I suppose it's probably different at different companies. This was a company that was very customer centric, which I'm sure, makes a huge difference. But when I first got here, and started working in the craft space, I thought, it's just about, I like to do business. I like to solve customer problems. I like to figure out how to keep the trains on time. And gradually, as I've been here longer, while I still enjoy all that stuff, I find myself gravitating more to the products and to the customers, how they're enjoying the products. What is the things that we do that really resonate with customers. And so it's almost like the inverse for me. I went into this with the business as my passion and turned into more of the actual thing, the art being more my passion. It sounds like you came at it from the other way. Yeah. At the end of the day, like you said, unless you're independently wealthy, you kind of have to do both. And so I suppose you were, and I consider myself fortunate too, that I've had to do that. It's forced me to focus. It's forced me to kind of see the whole equation. So, kind of a decent segue still in history and background though. So, okay, so you're at Bell's and you're the sales manager. What happened from there?
Well, I spent almost 10 years there, and it was an incredible opportunity in education on so many fronts. I have often described this as a duct taped kind of, whirlwind roller coaster brewery. The company was very small. I mean,
when we say small, how many people would you think?
Oh, I think it was probably 30.
Okay.
30 employees. I think we did 6,000 barrels the first year.
Did they have they had a tap room, right, at the time from the get-go, or no?
Yeah. Yes. But only for 2 years because it wasn't legal until 93.
Oh, okay. Got it.
And so I'm there in 95, and, Kalamazoo Brewing / Bell's was very popular, and we were early, so that meant there weren't a ton of other micro beers available, and one of that was both an opportunity and also sometimes a challenge because we were often oversold. So I had this we had to figure out how we were going to work together as a team. So there was a lot of chaos. There was a lot of disorganization. There was a lot of not being totally sure how much we could make in a given period.
Sure.
And so when you're out there trying to sell, and oftentimes people are ordering more than we had, we really had to develop systems around how to better understand our business and how to better understand how to create an intentional culture. Because the culture was all driven around Larry's personality and passion for making beer. It was an overgrown home brewery. It was very present and it was very intentional, but it wasn't being shared intentionally. And so
it wasn't operationalized at that point.
Yeah, and that I share that just because I had gotten some training at how to sell beer regionally, but I hadn't expected to be dropped into this, and like I became a conduit for connecting the production side and the sales side, and basically the company being an advocate for and a little bit of a connector for creating some structure around how we were going to work with one another. And that was a second sort of lifelong spark of something I've been connected to ever since, which is paying attention to how you work together so you can accomplish why you work together. That the beer and bringing beer to the people and being this formidable, this creative, force in that segment of business was only going to be possible if we got better at doing it. We had all the creativity, we had all the brewing, we had all the sort of brand seed, but it was a crash course on like all sides of business all of a sudden. And so it was very inspiring. It was very challenging. And then it was also the flashpoint for Michigan craft brewing, or what became craft brewing, because I just mentioned the law in late 1992, there was a law change that created the micro brewing license and the brew pub license. Prior to that, you could not sell beer by the glass to a consumer. There was one brewer's license. You could do brewery tours, you could sell beer to go, but you could not sell a pint of beer. And so in 1992, that law changed, which began a huge multi-year boom for increasing the number of breweries. In 1992, there were 3 breweries. I know we were going to save some of this for the next segment. But there were 3 breweries in 1992. There were 30 by 96 or 97, and 60 probably the year later. I didn't want to go as far as 2000 because I think there's much more, but it was doubling annually for a minute there, and that was really. So here I am. I have a little experience now, but a pretty young person to be in that role, and our state is going through this metamorphosis. It was very exciting, compelling, and probably a little bewildering at times.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was going to use the word terrifying, but bewildering sounds better.
Yeah.
So now that takes us to about your next chapter, because again, we're doing high level, as I said, and then you already alluded to this. We're going to dig in. Our technical segment will be to leverage some of your background here. Yeah. But 10 years later, about is when you switched over to a partnership at New Holland, which brought you to our side of the state.
Yeah,
then, right?
In 2004. For a number of reasons, it was important for me to leave Bell's, and I had been involved in the leadership of the Michigan Brewers Guild. I was around for the formative meetings, and then, I don't know, 4 years in or so, I became the president of the Michigan Brewers Guild. So I've been in that role for a number of years, and through that had relationships with other brewery owners. And so I was not sure what was going to be next, and I ended up in a conversation with one of the breweries that I really respected their artistic approach, which was New Holland Brewing here in Holland, Michigan. And talking to Brett and Jason and John and Dave, those were the existing partners, which ranged in many different roles, but it became apparent that there was a possibility and there was space for me. And so we worked that out, and I joined New Holland and was there for about 13 years in a very similar role. Of course, now I've got a different perspective and experience under my belt, and became a minority partner in that project. And but it was sales and marketing, which I like to reframe as branding and distribution. And that was another really remarkable thing, which really paved the way for me meeting you all here at Fen Valley.
Yep. I was going to say your timing of joining there or leaving there is about when I joined here.
Yeah. And the New Holland annual employee trip was to Fen Valley. And it's really what brought me to looking at Fenville as a place to live. So a couple years into that, I moved out here, and it was a remarkable experience. And my time, as we'll get into it, all through both of those positions was a deep, purposeful connection with the Michigan Brewers Guild. In New Holland, we began distilling in 2005. And then launched distribution of that in 2008. So that was really the front edge of Michigan craft distilling. So that was another formative period in the state as well as for me.
Do you think that, I guess I'm curious, it's sort of a chicken and egg question, but in both instances, whether you're talking about Kalamazoo Brewing Company / Bell's or New Holland, you were sort of there at the front end of the wave, whether it was, beer in the case of the first and then spirits in the case of the latter. How did you feel like your role was in that? I mean, was it a happy accident? Or do you find that you're just like intrinsically gravitate towards these folks that are thought of as crazy at the time? I mean, and maybe it's different at the two different organizations. I don't know.
It's a good question. I think that it feels like it was a happy accident, but it's an accident that happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
So I think I'm drawn to it, and it's also where my skill sets tend to be valued, is that, and again, you go back to that original creative description, is like figuring out how it can be when it isn't yet is sort of fascinating. And I think there's a lot of that in both of those positions. Maybe I'm a glutton for punishment. It's usually pretty heavy winds,
Yeah.
and difficult territory. Starting spirits in a control state, meaning the state is a player in the distribution of spirits. Will save all the definitions there, but and being one of the first ones to be this little tiny speck trying to become a dot and saying, "Hey, I want to get in," is really difficult and can be discouraging. And I think I'm just stubborn enough to stay in some of those things. And then it's very gratifying when not just New Holland spirits, but now you look around the state and there's distilleries and there's spirits on shelves and in bars, and it's still, I would say, gets beat up by the big ones quite a bit. And I look at it and see it's not quite where it could be, but it's a hell of a lot farther than it was in 2005.
Yeah, I can't figure out with spirits where we're at on the arc at this point. I mean, and not that if we all knew we could, we wouldn't have to work, but it does seem less clear to me. We have so much going for us with regard to making spirits in Michigan in terms of the ability to grow the raw materials in a sustainable way. We have good manufacturing background and engineering background in our state that, historically was put to use in automotive and is finding ways to repurpose that into different areas. And so on the other hand, like you say, you still go to most places that can serve at least on premise, and it's a thin slice of the market. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And
yeah, there are.
The question is, where are we going from here? And I don't know. Now, you are also an author. I own, I guess, only one of the books because it was given to me by you as a Christmas present one year, along with some bacon that you made when you were doing the whole pig class, which is we could probably do a whole podcast just on that experience. But just so tell me about the two books.
So I wrote Beervangelist Guide to the Galaxy, which I think I described along the lines of a seasonal tome to beer and food pairing. And it's really a cookbook, but it's more than a cookbook in that it had a lot of essays on flavor, on why it doesn't matter, on really both encouraging and describing the shift to a seasonal approach for food and drink, regardless of whether those things are all made in the same season you want to drink them, kind of understanding the difference between that. But I had been turned on to a lot of ideas from relationships I had with chefs. One of the early specialties that I developed in my craft beer career was being a beer and food. You know, I don't even like the word expert, but I think that because it's not where I started, but that was expertise that I gained through a lot of relationships and thousands of beer dinners. And time and time again, you'd learn from the chefs that, you know, looking at food seasonally changes everything. And choosing when to go to your pantry or when to import or bring in from far away and when to eat something that was grown nearby, both when like as a strategy and also when like, you know, May is the time for asparagus sort of mindset. So there's a lot of that in there, kind of and connecting all that to craft ideals and why food and drink matters. And really I wanted it to be approachable for the home cook. I wanted to demystify some of it and have it be welcoming and encouraging and not elitist about you should be drinking fancier stuff. So that was one book. I'm jumping into rabbit holes left and right here.
That book is great, though. By the way, I mean, I like it as much to read as I like it to cook from, which I think is your goal.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And yep.
And it's one thing about the Midwest. I mean, seasons are such a part of our culture, and so I think the fact that you kind of wrote the book around that. To me, there's a super visceral connection with so many of the ideas that you bring forward in there.
Thank you.
And I love it. So no,
Thank you.
Well done.
I was really proud of it, and I know that it had lived on my to-do list for years. Wasn't sure what it was going to be, and the moment that I decided to write it seasonally, so it starts with spring, goes through summer, fall, and winter. That's when it became a book.
Most writers tell me in retrospect that writing a book is the hardest thing they've ever had to do. I mean, would you put it up there for you? I mean, you've done a lot of hard stuff, but was it pretty darn hard?
Yeah. Especially the first one, and I would say other ones. I mean, I have another couple attempts that haven't flown yet. So, yeah, it's hard from a few points of view. And I also describe it as like, it's the most personal, I think done well, it's one of the most personal things you can do. You're putting your own thoughts out there. And then I remember the book launch party, and it's like, and now I'm opening it up to the world. So it's this private retreat into yourself to get those ideas captured and expressed. And that creates a lot of sort of solo time with yourself. And that's very interesting. And then you sell it. And it's a very bizarre sort of pivot. And yet people haven't read it yet at a launch party. So you're ready to talk about it. And
sure.
And anyway, so there's a lot of stuff, but the difficulty I think is, editing is tough. I mean, you got to pick and choose what you want to share, what's relevant, and have it be enjoyable and readable. And
I'm sure everybody does it different, process. But do you, I mean, let's focus on that book. I think the other book is going to be a perfect segue into the next segment. But
sounds good.
When you write, because I've never written a book, but I consider myself a pretty good writer, and I have to write a lot of web content and things where it's very concise, it's very on brand, it's very short-term use. I'm curious, when you're writing a book, at least in your style, do you write an outline? Do you just start writing stories? And you already gave the end, then you had to cut a bunch of stuff. But how do you start?
Well, it depends on the style of book and the style of narrative. But I do think having an outline is really helpful. And I also thinking of it like index cards that you can move around is really helpful.
Okay.
And I wrote in a software that allowed you to write sections and then drag and drop them. And so, because I ended up having, you have seasonal tomes. I had, rants where I would rant about something that I thought was frustrating. And I had, Spilled Milk, I think it was called, where I had like stories of my own cooking failures. And so I could write a series in those lanes and then organize them and move them around. But like I said, the original idea of, I'm going to move from season to season in this book, everything else felt very professorial. I was like, I'm going to teach the elements of pairing. And it just felt like very dry.
Yeah.
And it never really took flight. And then when I realized, this is a philosophy of eating and drinking, and pairing is one thing you can do to make that sing, then I can talk about how to pair, but why pair is like maybe more compelling to me. So figuring that structure out is important. But I'll say the other challenging thing about writing is really finding your voice, because there's different styles. Like if you're writing for a website, if you're writing for a press release, if you're writing a technical manual, they all require different tones and really different styles and lengths and all that stuff. And and I have a little bit of both in me, or all of them in me. So when I was writing this, some of the best feedback I got was when I had other people reading it, which included a writing coach and some friends and family. And there were certain sections where they're like, this feels too dry or too literal. And like, I remember being like, editing also includes learning to trust editors or people that are reading and get feedback, and to listen to it and take it in, even if you start out not agreeing with it. And I just remember like the sections that were getting critical reviews were more technical, where I was really trying to explain something I thought was challenging concept. And I was like, you mean, like, what's wrong with it? You mean it's correct? Like, what do I got to explain it? But it was really a shift from like, they were identifying, it took me a minute to grasp that when you're telling stories, I want to keep reading. When you start teaching me this method, it starts to drag. And so I really, this again could be a whole episode, so I'll jump off of it. But what I really needed to do was push myself into my speaking voice. So I thought, I know how to read a room. I do a lot of public speaking. You know when to move on. You know when to make a joke or drop an F-bomb or whatever the thing is. Like when you have the energy of listeners in front of you, again, going back to musical performance, you know how to, at least I know how I feel comfortable with my ability to gauge that. And so I just pretended I was speaking to people and wrote the rest of the book, and everything came alive.
That makes sense. I mean, and cookbook, again, we'll have to pull ourselves back out of this rabbit hole, but I could do this all day. So maybe we're going to have to do a follow on to this one in a while. But I got to believe that the idea of then having the pieces of that are actually recipes that people can follow and that you've developed, and then making them, because we all have our own kind of way of describing what we do in the kitchen, and also our own things we kind of intuitively know that you just, especially someone who likes to cook, as I know you do, and cooks a lot from feel, to try to write that down in a way that you think somebody else is going to be able to understand must have been quite the challenge too.
Yeah, and there's also, so this is, I don't know, it's probably pre-Instagram, or at least before I was on Instagram. And so we didn't have all these short reel video stories. The web had recipes on it, but not in the same way it does now. And like there's this balancing act of like, I hate scrolling through, I want to look up a recipe for something, and on the web it's like, hey, this recipe's coming up, but first let me tell you about my grandmother and give you about 35 ads, and like right cut to the quick. So I like to try to provide both of like, if you want the story about how this came to be, it's over here, and what's I think important about this method, and here's the recipe, which is straightforward and clean, and go make the food. Like, I like to give the reader choice. Yeah.
Well, as we segue away, I'll say one other thing that kind of struck me as I was listening to you talk about cooking and writing about it, that I definitely feel like, because I like to cook, it's one of my ways I relax. It's funny because it's the time when people say they think, they come over, they think it's a burden that you cooked for them, right? Because you are, I mean, you're feeding them, right? but for me, it's like the only time I relax. So I'll take the compliment and I'll take the, the gratitude, but I'm having more fun than you probably realize. But if you're doing it right, at least the way I feel like, I'm going to screw up sometimes, because I'm pushing myself, I'm taking on more than I probably should. And so I think your other point of just not taking it too seriously, having fun with it, being open to new ideas is really a good lesson as well, just because, I tell that to people. I'm like, listen, if you come over enough, you're going to have one of these epic failures that we'll just be hopping in the car and heading down the road to eat, because that's how we roll. I'm not always going to play it safe in the kitchen.
Yeah, and I think a big thing that came through for me, it was a medium segment in the book, but I think post book really, I started to realize is a core issue, is the art of being a host. Is that you're there to provide comfort and space and welcome to people who are eating with you. And the eating and drinking is a vehicle towards hosting and making people feel comfortable. And like, that's it. So you can fail a dish and still host well. Like, failing a dish is only a failure in hosting if you freak out and run out of the room screaming. Like, understanding the connection. And I think this goes to food and beverage in general, not just cooking at home, but like, why is any of this important? Well, because we enjoy time together with people eating and drinking things that bring us happiness or intrigue or whatever. But we like giving things to each other as much as, this wouldn't exist if we all drank at home alone.
Right. Right.
This is a social interaction, and that the more that becomes our raison d'etre, the better.
Yeah. Wine. I think all beverages, like say food and beverage, that is the root problem we're trying to solve, is that human beings are social creatures, and this creates a good structure for that socialization to occur. And losing sight of that, I think what reminded me when you talked about the spilled milk section of the book. Yeah. I think bringing that out to people is good, because if it helps a few people be less intimidated by the idea, I think that's the other thing, that craft beverages can be intimidating. And I think anything that we do in the industry, you use the word demystify. I start out almost every one of my tours at the winery with that exact same thing. My goal is for you to walk out of here understanding better how wine is made, so that you can have more fun with it in the future. You can better be able to go buy something or just enjoy something. But the goal of all of that is that social interaction with other human beings. And we have that in our DNA as a species. It's one of the things that really differentiates us from a lot. There's a lot of social species for sure, but our ability to communicate on a whole different level, and feel empathy and all these things was an adaptation that served us well as a society, as a species, and we should take some credit for that, I suppose, as craft beverage producers.
Yeah, and my wife Ula likes to say, perfection is not emotionally safe, and so I think that if you want people to learn from you, if you're trying to share knowledge or share an approach to something, either painting perfection as a target or trying to express that somehow you as the teacher has attained it, is not an invitation to trust or learning. So like leaning in, we don't often like being in the middle of somebody's wipeout, meaning some of the stories I told had a lot of discomfort in them.
Sure.
But by sharing it, it's a vulnerability that I think allows people to try, and allows people to trust that perfection is not the goal.
Yeah. And some of my favorite hosting stories in the long arc of time have involved some of the most epic failures. As you said, the dinner that just goes off without a hitch, is often not the one that's remembered and is told in story fashion for years to come. Yeah. So in the moment, it can
certainly
be
not with as much detail. Like, that was a great dinner. I remember that one. Right. Yeah. Versus like, oh yes, I remember.
Yes, that's the one where the kitchen flooded, or that. Yeah. Absolutely. So that is so the other book. I think this is how I'm going to segue this, just because you're my only dual author thus far. It was A Rising Tide, Stories from the Michigan Brewers Guild. And while I don't just want to focus on your perspective of beer, obviously that's where you cut your teeth for sure. And I'm kind of curious, like, so the next segment, and these two segments often just sort of blend together, and which is kind of the goal. But today we'd like to kind of take advantage of your experience to kind of talk us through some of that long arc of history and how you see it. And then, of course, we'll kind of wrap this segment with kind of where you see things going as we sit here. Of course, that's, anyone's guess, but you as an educated guess from someone who's walked in these shoes for so long.
Yeah. Well, so A Rising Tide was, pardon me, I don't know why I have this tickle, but A Rising Tide was an effort to document the path of the growing Michigan craft brewing movement and the history of it. And I had collaborated with the Guild and Scott Graham, the executive director, quite a bit. And we had a sense of, hey, if we don't start writing this down, we might lose some stories and lose some perspective. And so I think I conducted 30 to 50 interviews or so. And the idea was to, again, with my learnings, to not share a professorial view of here's what I know individually, was let's tell the stories of the people that made up this movement and hear what they have to say about their own path and about their integration with the Guild or their collaboration with others, and how did this Michigan scene come to be. And that's really what it is. And I put volume 1 on it because there could be a volume 2.
So far, there's just volume 1.
Yeah. And
when was this written? Or when did it?
Would have been 18, I think.
Okay.
And then I also produced a documentary that has some limited, it's on YouTube, but a 25th anniversary documentary that took excerpts from some of those interviews and added a number of more to celebrate 25 years of Michigan Brewers Guild. So those two pieces are kind of together. Mm-hmm. And so it was really compelling. I mean, I think that the very short story that I think applies to many different things is that we're very proud of, there's a collaborative spirit to the Michigan brewing community. And I think beverage overall, but this is about brewing. And how did that come to be? Why is it important? And I recall that, I think if you came into Michigan brewing post 2000, the Michigan brewing scene, you'd think that's the way it had always been. And in 1996, 97, we were at odds. There was all these new entries. It was chaos and stress. And through some nudging, we got together in a room and created the Michigan Brewers Guild, which didn't have state funding or any parent or anything like that. It was just a group of brewery people and brewery owners saying, we think we can be stronger together than apart. It was not legislative because we didn't agree. Brew pubs and micros had very different objectives legislatively, but we thought we need to promote Michigan-made beer as an important thing in this state. That's what we came together on, and then through hosting the first summer beer festival, relationships were formed, and like that's the seed bed. That's the part. That's why we get along and have friends that are across the state and different license types, different personalities, because we had this project together. We got to know each other, and then that everything else spawned from that. But other states have, we've learned that other states are not always that connected. And so that was very gratifying and informative and inspiring in terms of what's important.
I'm curious if you think that Michigan, and we talk about this a lot in the wine industry, because in a lot of ways we aspire for the brand that the beer industry in Michigan has developed when you look outside of the state especially. Do you think a lot of that can be attributed to the fact that there was this kind of all-in initiative, again, regardless of your background, your legislative interests, and even the beer styles? Do you think that really helped to build that brand?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think there's a number of components. There's the time in it, and that, Bell's was the oldest brewery east of Boulder for a while, so there was an early successful adopter in it. And then the scene was also, I mean, we're I don't know where we are now, but somewhere between fifth and sixth in terms of number of breweries per state. So the prolific nature of breweries opening in Michigan became part of that, being a beer destination. But without the connective tissue, without us rooting for each other and saying nice things about each other, if we were all battling to end one another, it would not have that, it would not spread and have people nationwide saying, oh my God, you got to go to Michigan. The beer there is incredible. That happened from this overall tone that was set from community. And so a number of factors play. And I also believe that, we're a state of travelers, that Detroit is an awesome city in the state, but it's not the same anchor magnet that, say, Chicago is to Illinois, where there's Chicago and then there's the rest of Illinois, right? People in Chicago, you ask them where Peoria is. What? They might know Springfield because of Simpsons, but
right.
In Michigan, we're travelers, right? There's a big outdoor component. There's lots of vibrant, medium-sized cities and small towns. So, people in Kalamazoo go to Ann Arbor, go to Grand Rapids, go to Traverse City, the Leelanau Peninsula, the UP, Detroit, all over the place. And so I also think that really created not just the industry people, but the consumers were visiting all these different breweries as they popped up across the state and telling one another about them. So there's something about the Michigander DNA that was really, and I think this is a strong suit for wineries too. The touring wineries, the visiting them. I'm going to go up north. I'm going to go over here. That is a Michigander, and other regions too. But it's one of the things Michiganders do. They travel and they talk to each other about what was great there.
I hadn't thought of that, but that's a really good point. And it's certainly been my personal experience when I travel up to other parts of the state. I would frequently want to check out the local brewery and see what they were up to and then talk about it later. And so, considering I've done it all these years, I'm surprised I hadn't thought of that before. That's a really good perspective. And I think it certainly helps because when you are, especially then when you're a producer, because inevitably you get questions about what do you like to drink or where do you like to go? And being able to answer that question from firsthand experiences, of course, makes you more credible, makes it more authentic. And so the fact that we do that as a culture, like you say, it's very much embedded in our state to travel around, experience the different areas, but do it often through food and beverage, which is a good way to do it, obviously.
And the attitude is a huge differentiator. Sorry about that.
It's all the cherry trees in bloom right now, Fred.
It is. There's a lot going on. So the attitude is a huge differentiator in that the difference between competitor and collegial framework, meaning to be collegial doesn't mean you don't compete and that you don't want to do well. But if somebody said, what do you think about the other winery around you? And you said, why would I drink anybody else's wine besides mine? It's not an inviting posture. It's not supportive to the overall movement of Michigan can make great wine. But it is out there as an attitude in business.
Definitely.
I should be laser focused and siloed on my brand only. And we see it in other industries. I could not be caught holding a product from my competitor. That exists in the world.
And in some industries, it kind of makes sense, right? Like if you own exactly one of something your entire life as a consumer, then it probably makes sense that the brand has to be sort of like the one you choose.
Yeah.
But certainly in a consumable brand where you're by definition trying to constantly rebuy it, the idea that you would just focus on one brand does seem kind of silly.
And it's also, I think, something that makers are more likely and also more important that they should hold this curiosity and interest in each other. And I found, like, on the sales versus production side, the brewers always had this in spades where they're like, I drink my beer all the time. So when they'd travel, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that. They had a real curiosity, where sales are indoctrinated with this other idea. Like, if I'm in an account and they have my product, I have to support my product. I can't be seen as not liking my own stuff or not supporting it. I also, if I'm going to be spending money, I ought to be pulling mine across the bar. That's also true, and it's not quite the bad side of things, but like the balancing act is like being able to see both of those and embody both of them in either your organization or yourself. Of like, there's a time to support my product, and there's a time to be curious and tasting other products, even with like an account owner, and saying, some of my favorite things were turned on to me when a counter said, "Hey, I bet you like this," and slide over somebody else's stuff that if I said I don't drink other people's things, it would have just like ended it.
Yep.
So anyways, I think that attitude is often found in the makers themselves, and I think Michigan is a great fertile ground for it because of who we are.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to go. We got a little off track there, which is good. We're going to bring it back a little more. So
Thanks.
We covered a lot of the beer a little bit, as you kind of went through some of your early history with Bell's, but I'm curious, are there some big picture? I would say I think that's a big one. The idea that from the get-go, or at least from the point where there was enough momentum and critical mass where you could even call it a group. I suppose when you first started at Bell's, it'd be hard to even define a group at that point. But so that was a big part of it, the camaraderie piece, the kind of all for one for all kind of an approach to the industry. And then I think, again, you summarized it well, that's ingrained in the culture of the craft beverage industry so deeply that it's this really interesting balancing act of loving what you make, because that's important, and knowing what you make is important, but also wanting to be curious about what other people are making and support what they're doing and experience it viscerally is so unique to our industry. And I guess other makers like industries, like you said, it's like a musician who never listened to anyone else's music that'd be seen as sort of insane. Right. And so I think that mentality exists in this sort of highly craft environment, but kind of moving then into, probably a lot of time when you were at New Holland, because that seems like when the industry really took off. I mean, the beer industry was well on its way, of course, but it continued with that forward momentum well through your entire time there. And then at that point, craft distilling, it sounds like really that was really the beginning of that piece. What was it like during those times? Because you were really still part of one of the original one of the original makers. How was it from that point of view as all this stuff was growing around?
So just kind of comparing this mindset to the spirit side, in some ways I felt like I'm looking for a word here. I don't know. I felt like the psyche took some dents in some ways because I had this view of where I thought it would go based on the beer arc. And then that would often run into some pretty serious dead ends. Some of that was structural in Michigan because of the distribution elements and the closed door sort of policy. But then also consumers are different. And like brewing, especially at that time, I think wineries have it as well, but brewing is very attached to the maker brand and who owns it and who makes it and where it's made. And like, there was a lot of stock taken of the more legit you were and the more you could express that well, that street cred would have value on the shelf. And spirits, this will sound fairly critical, and I suppose it's meant to be. In spirits, I realized not only was there a lot of smoke and mirrors, and the industry played a lot of games of like, well, they didn't necessarily make it, they didn't necessarily come from there, and you don't know who owns this brand, and actually those 5 brands are all the same parent. Like, there's a lot of confusion that was not expressed on the shelf, and the consumer doesn't have the roadmap to even find those answers out on the shelf. Without being a student of the game, which I don't think they should be required to be. But we saw some things happen where like we realized, well, that's not how the spirit drinker views things.
Yeah.
they're not really that interested in it. And when some large American distilleries were sold to international entities and nobody really cried, I just thought, oh, this is a different environment where that's not how spirits has been sold. And the other issue was that I felt like craft brewers were solving a flavor gap, right? So if you wanted beer flavor, in the 70s, you had to leave the major domestics because they were all making light lagers, whether they were actual light beer or just a Pilsner.
Yeah.
But if you wanted stouts and porters and English styles and German styles, you really needed to import those or learn how to brew. So there was a gap on the shelf that was either imported and more expensive or domestic and less expensive. Well, spirits, we came to realize there wasn't that like you could get good gin and good bourbon and it could come from wherever, but we had to find different ways to compel to earn our space on the shelf, and it wasn't as readily apparent. There wasn't a problem, and so
there wasn't a flavor gap.
There wasn't a flavor gap,
Yeah.
and then to say, hey, but we're local, so you should really ought to have a local section, and the spirit drinkers going, huh?
Yeah.
I don't have an expectation for local spirits, and I don't really want to pay, 20-30% more for local when I'm not sure if it's proven. So we had to grow up a little. We had to earn trust. We had to kind of make reasons to be on the shelf. And I'd say that's still the challenges today, is that you can go along and drink cocktails and have a pretty wide-ranging spirits experience without having to engage local regional distilleries. And so the consumer and the retailer and all the path towards making it easier to acquire, they need to be inspired to do that. And that, I'll just say it's harder in spirits than it was in beer, and it's made progress. And I imagine, I think Michigan wineries are probably in the middle between the two, that you can get great wines in all these styles without having to be Michigan made. And so somebody's got to have another reason. Either I like this particular wine, I like this particular winemaker, or I had an experience there that this is connecting me to. So I like drinking this wine because it reminds me of that time we were here or there, or my brother brought it to me or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's part of it for sure. And I've thought about this a lot. This isn't the first time, even this week, sitting in this chair, where I've thought about the difference between how wine sometimes ends up sort of in the middle of beer and spirits in how it's thought of, how it's marketed, even how it's distributed. And one of the things that we sort of hang our hat on as winemakers is that the seasonal variation of the raw materials has a huge impact. In other words, the grapes and how the season affects the grapes has a bigger impact on what we can bring to the market than what we can do as winemakers in a lot of ways. And so by definition, that's going to connect you to the local source more, of all the products. And of course, beer style and even spirit style notwithstanding, certainly some styles will be more connected to the raw ingredients than others, especially in beer, I suspect. But so I think that by definition allows us to sort of leverage that for the local marketing piece of the puzzle, where for beer and spirits, oftentimes there's a much bigger disconnect between, say, the grain and the spirit, right? It's going through more transformation, especially if it's a long-aged product or something. And also in Michigan, at least historically, we haven't been able to produce enough of those raw materials, especially in beer, talk about hops, where you looked at the local as more the manufacturer, the person who did the hard work, which is good. It's hard work. Not that growing isn't hard work, but it's a level removed, where for whatever reason in wine, there's this connection to the winemaker and to the farm that the grapes came off of, which really harkens back to France thousands of years ago. We didn't invent this in the US. We just sort of borrowed the system. But I do think it makes it harder for the for spirits, because you're like you say, you've got to solve the flavor gap. I think you put it really well, because just saying we're local isn't going to be enough. And even saying we're growing this grain local probably still isn't enough, because it's just not ingrained in how that product has historically been viewed through the lens of the consumer. And so you got to do something else. You either have to fulfill the flavor gap, or you got to really get just out there. Was my old boss used to say, pick and shovel work. It's sort of one customer at a time. You're introducing what you do. You're telling them your story, because then you get to that other piece that you alluded to, which is that was the bottle that was on my table when we had that experience, and I'm buying that bottle to go back to that experience.
Exactly.
But that is the most durable of all of the ways that you can reach your consumer. But it's also, like a lot of things that are durable, it's the thing that takes the longest to develop
and the longest to move. I mean, that was also my realization when I think I wrote about this in Beervangelist Guide. It's like, coming across an in-law who had developed all, tastes and all sorts of things as they grew up and became professional. I had more resources, and there's still, Miller Lite in the fridge. And I thought, how is this the last upgrade?
Right.
Like, they're not experts in these other areas, but they're upgrading their, lifestyle and all these other areas. And there's this one thing that's still like the lowest price thing. And I just realized, it changed me to, instead of being mad about that, to say, that's because beer is an emotional product.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that's the beer they drank in college. That's the beer they might have drank on their first date, or their first this or their first that.
Yep.
Like, that's a comfort to them.
Yeah,
that has nothing to do with where the barley was grown, who made it, what the price is. And so that is actually a proof of concept of what we're trying to develop. We just have to get those experiences attached to our experiences and products. And so, like, there is a certain amount of admiration for, not only does it take long to get, but once you have that, they're likely to stick with you for a very long time because you're part of their life now.
Yeah, and you can make an excuse for infusing beverages into a lot of different things, whether it's a celebration or whether it's a morning or anything in between. The other thing I was wondering about, if this is something that you've thought of, the fact that spirits is the highest concentration of alcohol, generally speaking, per volume, meaning that bottle is going to go a lot further. So you're by definition, if you're just going to drink the same amount of ethanol, say yearly, and you're going to split that between wine, beer, or spirits, and you just take an average strength of each, you're going to replace your spirit bottles a lot less frequently, right? You're cutting them with mixers, or you're taking smaller amounts of liquid. Do you think that replacement cycle makes it harder too?
I think that perception exists. I don't know that when you get down to it, it's all that relevant. But I think that meaning there are people who don't drink spirits that often, and so that bottle is going to last a long time. Or they have multiple bottles, but making a cocktail requires the cooking of drink making.
Definitely.
Pouring a beer or a glass of wine involves maybe a glass. Maybe not if it came in a different package.
Right.
But so that some assembly is required is in spirits, because I just remember as a beer guy originally, a bottle seemed like so much, and like one being empty would be like, wow, did we really empty? It's 16 drinks, right? On a standard cocktail pour. So like, it's less than a case of beer.
Yeah.
It's a little more than 3 bottles of wine.
Yeah.
So if we brought 3 bottles home from the winery, we're not thinking, I'm never going to have to replace these. So I think it's a perception, but it's not necessarily accurate.
Yeah.
But there's these other pieces that make it move slowly more than what they think about it. And I think that's where I love teaching cocktail classes and introducing people to some simple things that can help their setup be easier to make drinks. Because there's a whole world. I mean, it's ultimately, it has that sort of burden of some assembly required. It's also its greatest strength. So like, I can do things with beer or wine, but it ends up being the same art. But with spirits, that gin that I like can be 20 different things based on what I do with it.
Yeah.
And so I have all this range available, but it's not where people start. And, so it requires sort of a cooking attitude.
Yeah, you've brought over, this will be a great segment. We'll keep going on the history, but we'll start some tasting at the same time because I think stuff, well, you'll tell me what you brought, but I think there'll be some tie-ins.
Yeah.
But while, you've brought stuff to my house before, you've brought like your own mini bar kit, where you bring the bitters, you bring the tools that you like. And I just made some notes on that because I think we should do a segment on that too. You're going to be like the most repeated guest just because you have the most broad perspective. But
all right.
The idea of making it easy, because I think you nailed it. I love cocktails, but there are some days when I'm just like, I don't have it in me. But I'm sitting there slaving away in the kitchen while I'm saying that.
Right.
I'm literally cooking, handmade pasta while saying I don't have time to make myself a cocktail or I don't have the energy to do it, so I'll just grab a glass of wine or a beer. And I think that is a really good point. I still think there's something about the consumer perception of the price. And that was where you really nailed it when you said, 3 bottles of wine equals 1/5 of say vodka or whatever. And price-wise, it'd be about the same too. Like if you have 3, but it's that one bottle price at the moment. There's always that consumer hurdle to get over.
Yes, on the shelf, $35 looks like a lot.
Yeah, but that's a $10 bottle of wine,
right,
if you're really looking at it that
right.
way. So interesting. So let's this segment again. The first 3 are really one segment. I just try to kind of because I could be here all day and I love it. I wish I could be here all day. So we're kind of transitioning into tasting some stuff. And Fred was nice enough to bring us a couple things that I don't know anything about.
That's a little heavy.
Well, we don't have to finish it all this second.
I'll split that one.
There you go. But yeah, I know nothing. I don't even know what he brought. So I have guests put together they fill out a little questionnaire online before they come in, just in case there's anything I need to know to get ready for them. And I know Fred's basic answer
pop
was
quiz style.
Right. His basic was I'll bring something, which was awesome, which I totally expected. And so I don't have a clue. So I don't know where you want to start here.
Well, I thought, I think we'll start with let's start with the wine glass.
Okay.
So this is, being the hybrid guest that I am, I decided to bring spirits, and spirits that I was never connected to the creation of,
okay,
idea-wise or making of. So ethnology. So I got this on a trip up north last year, and this is a cherry blossom honey spirit. So it is,
and I'll have you send me the links to these, and so we can put them in the show notes.
It is fermented. It's spirits distilled from local honey.
Okay.
So it's 80 proof, and I enjoyed it enough that I only have a third of the bottle left, although it's lasted me for a while. And I thought it'd be interesting to just taste stuff together with curiosity rather than knowledge.
So it's from local, so it's almost like distilled mead.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. One of our associate winemaker who's going to be on here soon, Cole, is a mead maker, and so I've learned a little bit about it.
I think this has some barrel in it. I'm looking for that. I would think so. It has to because it's
sort of smells like
color.
it. There's definitely a kind of a vanilla sort of light baking spice, more vanilla kind of nutmeg that I get that certainly probably is barrel influenced. Interesting. I haven't tasted it. I've just been smelling it so far. It's good. The aromatic's really, really cool.
Yeah, I find tasting spirits to be an interesting shift from beer and wine too, just because I don't know.
How so?
Well, I think that it's both powerful and subtle at the same time, and that the aroma. What I was just thinking about is I had a funny memory of smelling it, putting your nose in it like you would beer,
yeah,
and like blasting my nostrils out in the old days, and so like smelling it from a little distance and maybe on one side, and then letting it. I've also learned to let it sit on your tongue, in your mouth for a little bit before swallowing it, and also that the second sip I find brings more understanding of flavor. The first sip is a little bit of a wake up to your palate.
For spirits?
Yeah.
I think
the
that's
first
true.
sip will kind of like your palate braces a little bit, and so, but that's not the full representation. So the thought is to kind of let that acclimate for a second and then go in for a second, and you can usually get more flavor.
I think the interesting, no, I think that's a good way to put it. Because I'm not an expert at all either. I've actually had to judge spirits at a wine competition once, brandies, and I didn't even know where to start. And I think nowadays I might be a little bit better at it, but still not great. I've never made it. That's part of it. But so this is 80 proof, which for those at home mean it's 40% alcohol, correct?
Yep.
Which how would that stack up to sort of a typical? I don't even know what you define this as. That's what's sort of interesting about this spirit.
I think you would call this honey whiskey. I mean, they just say spirit distilled from honey. Most likely, that's probably a labeling, threading the needle of what the feds want them to call it.
Exactly.
Because honey's not defined on the whiskey list.
Yep.
But I would think this is a honey whiskey because it's barreled, and I don't think there are other botanicals in there. Nope. But what was the other?
But it's like a brandy would be fruit based, obviously.
Yeah.
So honey's not a fruit. So it's sort of like,
and it's not a grain,
right? Yeah.
So I think it's this sort of interloper,
which I think is really interesting. That's why you really setting the bar high for the non-wine spirits here.
And I really like it.
I do too.
There's like a banana chip character, like the way you get toasted banana chips are different than banana. Mm-hmm. And there's that little kind of caramelization part of it, and yet it feels kind of light. I mean, I think this by itself is great. This on ice with a little soda water would be great. Maybe some bitters. Like, it doesn't. You could do other things, but I mean, I think this is a nice little spritz base because you want that honey character to stay.
Yep.
So I don't really want to come at it with big flavors. I want to come at it with anything that would help frame it. Maybe make it long.
Okay.
Oh, your other question was 80 proof. That's like the standard proof for a regular strength spirit. That's not a liqueur or cordial. That's lower, like 23-30.
Yep.
And it's not overproof, which what they would describe whiskeys at 100 or more.
Yep.
Even you get into 90, 95, it's above average.
Yep.
So 80 proof, like an ounce and a half of 80 proof whiskey is like a cocktail standard.
Yeah, I would have a tough time wanting to put this with much of anything. Like you say, maybe something to frame it in, maybe depending on whether you want to rock or not. I like it the way it is right now. Of course, this is going to make it the most expressive from actually trying it in its purest sense and putting it in the wine glasses because I didn't bring any other glasses in part, but it's really not a bad option.
Oh, and I chose it for this spirit though, thinking this will help that aroma come out.
And it does. I mean, like you say, it's almost too much when you go just straight in like you would if you're doing wine where you just get your nose right
wine
in there.
Wine drinkers and
like,
beer drinkers start out by destroying their nostrils.
But it's really fun. So when you say like, if you did it, let's just say neat, would you do any kind of twist in there to frame it, or would you just leave it, or does that part of more the visual? How does a twist factor into a cocktail?
Well, a twist, it's called the twist partly because you're going to twist that rind.
Yep.
And so when you twist it over the glass, you're actually going to get oils from that peel. So whether that's lemon or orange or lime, in this case, I think either lemon or orange would work, but it's different than putting a wedge in or putting, pressed juice in. And so I think, something like a twist would be great.
So you use that oil on the rim of the glass almost?
Well, the act of twisting it would be over the center of the glass. So like that spritz that comes out of the peel actually goes into
the liquid.
And then you can rub the peel and hang it on the glass. You could drop it in the glass. Depends on the cocktail or your approach or who taught you or whatever.
Yeah.
But, being able to rub, especially the outside peel part that has those oils on it, around the edge of the glass is going to give you a little sensation as you drink it. I think that would be appropriate. And lemon and honey go well together.
Right.
You know, so like whether you were building a cocktail or just accentuating it with a neat or a rocks pour, I think would be lovely.
I think this is a good example of course, you picked the example, so sort of tracks, but of one of the core things you talked about as far as the industry, the spirits industry, because this fills a flavor niche.
Right. And it has that other part of the story of it is, you know, featuring a local agricultural product. Now, I don't think that's why people go looking for spirits, but it might be the thing that helps the story travel.
Absolutely.
And also, it's part of their values to support local agriculture. So it might be doing a distillery value versus and honey is a very expressive ingredient. So it's similar to grapes. Like, well, was it wildflower honey? Was it on the west side or the east side? Where was it in relationship to fruit and other pollinators and like, you know, and I think where this stuff should live, where I like it to live is that I don't have to get the story about which flowers these bees connected to enjoy this product. If I want to go to that level, if I want to go a ring or two deep and I'm on a tour or somebody's sharing with me or like this type of conversation, I love that it holds up. There's a legitimate, inspiring path towards agriculture, but it's not a requirement for me to like this. I can taste this and go, oh, I haven't had anything like that before.
Yep.
Interesting. And I can even start thinking about this is how I'd like to drink it. And you know what I mean? So I love it to not expect the customer to have to climb the ladder in order to enjoy a product.
And I think that's a big point there as far as the long-term marketability of any given product. It has to be able to hit you at those different levels. If it's
it should be, don't drink that yet. I got to explain it.
Right.
Like that's not the host part.
Exactly.
And this, I guess what I'm saying is, while this has this really interesting story to it, and it helps even understand the flavors, it's just delightful without knowing it.
Yep. Well, as you're setting up the next one thing what I noticed on this too is another kind of inside baseball trick that we use in the wine industry, which I think is super applicable here, which is sometimes I learn the most about a wine when I smell the empty glass.
Yeah.
A lot of the really nuanced aromatics will present themselves when the glass is empty. It's super volatile aromatics at that point.
And this is where you're getting that oaky vanilla. Like I really get the oak.
Yeah, it's neat. I mean, it's
partly because I can take a bigger whiff.
Right, exactly. I think that's part of it. But and with wine, I think it's even though you can get in there with wine and beer originally, it's as that last bit of aromatic starts to volatilize, it tends to be like really like you can just pick out each individual thing a little bit easier. So it's definitely the case with this one. This is really cool. It was an awesome one, Fred. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So the next one I brought, you want to go into that? Or
let's do it. Let's do it. That way we can talk about what you do for your day job these days.
Yeah. So this is Dr. Bird Traditional Pot Still Pineapple Rum. And it's at Navy strength, which is 114 proof. This is so Corktown Distillery, which is 2 James in Detroit.
Okay.
And so I don't know their exact process, but they are importing. They're in relationship with Jamaican Supply. So distilled in St. Catherine, Jamaica, produced and bottled by Corktown Distillery. So there's a path between Jamaica and Detroit on this that I'm not exactly sure how it goes.
Yep.
But Jamaican rum, I should taste this before I talk too much about it. But Jamaican rum is known for its expressing really funky characters of fermentation. Pot distilled means it's distilled probably to around 140 proof, where vodka and gin, neutral spirits, are at like 195.
Okay.
So they're distilling out almost everything except for alcohol, and then they might add flavors later. For whiskey and this rum, being pot distilled means you're going to taste the molasses and the sugars that ferment it, because at 145 proof, that means that 73% is spirits and 27% is material besides spirits. So that's going to bring a flavor of the agriculture and ingredients.
Sure. Okay.
Or fermentation.
Right.
And I just picked this bottle up at a little while ago, and I thought this would be an interesting thing to explore.
Well, once again, it illustrates in liquid form one of the points you made today, which is the idea that the spirits world has all these different supply chain things going on, that when you figure out that there's a local piece of it, but where the actual source fermentation came from might not be local, doesn't necessarily matter the way that we've always thought about it to matter. So I think this was another good example. Also, just as the aromatic on this, I don't even know where to begin. I don't even know how to describe it. It's I'm not saying it not in a very good way. It's got my attention.
Yeah, and so rum has a really interesting path, different than, but as rich as history. A history as whiskey, and very much along the spice route. And so rum is connected to punches and lots of other aspects of cocktail history that I find fascinating. And it can be drank by itself, just like this.
Yeah, so a little bit hotter for sure, which it goes 57% with a 114 proof. You can feel that alcohol right away.
And generally speaking, when I see things north of 100 proof, which have different names on the label, like Bottled and Bond is attached to 100 proof and a certain amount of age, and Navy strength. I don't know how specific that's regulated, but that's what they're calling here, is a barrel strength, things like that. So when you see it up in that territory, I like to think of it as it's putting the dilution in the hands of the drinker, right? So it doesn't mean you have to drink it at that strength.
Right.
It means that it's expressed at this strength to give the most flavorful opportunities to the consumer. So if you have 120 proof whiskey, adding water to it, adding other stuff to it, adding ice to it, bringing it to so if you were going to make 80 proof whiskey, you start at 145 out of the barrel, and or maybe 125 after
you're cutting it back with water.
So the distiller's cutting it to 80 proof. By coming to you at barrel strength, it's giving the drinker the opportunity to choose where they like it. And that's so I just think that's an interesting perspective that can help be like, well, that's too strong for me.
Yep.
Well, you could use half the quantity, or you could dilute it, or but it's going to have a lot more flavor opportunities, or at least that's what I'm guessing the producer, why they chose to bottle it at that strength. Yeah.
Well, you'd have to think that, you'd have to hope, at least in most cases, that they're trying to find the strength that presents the product the best, for however they envision it being utilized, or they just want to create the most blank canvas they can for the consumer, as you pointed out, to have more flexibility in the direction that they go.
Yeah.
And maybe there's also probably a sweet spot in where they feel like, economically speaking, they're getting more bang for their buck in their distribution. I mean, there's probably 1,000,001 reasons why the strength is chosen the way that it is. But in this case, I mean, I love the fact that this is a very confusing wine for me, or beverage for me, rather. I mean, it's kind of making me think. There's more of a savory side of this one that I find to be really interesting, and I don't know how to describe it, because you think pineapple, you don't think savory. You think rum, I don't really think savory.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's really interesting with the pineapple component to think that way, but it does have a lot of bridges to that, and I think that's sort of the funky. There's fermentation character in here that's basically fermented molasses that has, even that you'd think would run sweet.
Well, I think that might be where that's coming, though.
But it has a sort of a umami character
Yes.
and like this other sort of just funky, hard to describe flavor component.
It is.
That feels savory.
Yeah. Now, so this is the pop quiz kind of thing. I mean, how would you design a cocktail with this? What would be your first thought?
Well,
doesn't have to be your last thought. You got a lot left in the bottle here.
Yeah, my first thought really is punch, and punch took me a while to grasp a more, I was going to say modern, but it's really a historic view of punch, because Midwestern kid growing up in the 70s and 80s, we think Hawaiian punch, we think sweet things, we think terrible college drinks, but punch has this history in the spice route where oftentimes instead of water, it's tea, and it includes ingredients that are just about from everywhere because everybody was crossing those routes nautically, right? And so you're in the sugar region, which is why it's rum, which is made from sugar, and often in those regions. You have citrus, you have spices and botanical components and teas, and so blending that in a way that kind of can have that savory sweet component is something that I would do here. So, and I was just looking up our menu because we were talking about getting back to Red Horse, and so we have a dinner coming up with Farmhouse Deli in Douglas, and talking with Christine, we were talking about, hey, she wanted to have her team respond to beverages and the pairings instead of the other way around.
Yep.
We were talking family style, and then it led to me thinking about batch drinks, and so we largely have a punch-based menu, or punch-like drinks, and so I don't think I'm using this rum in particular, but there's time, so we might. Like I have a drink I called Pier Cove Sparkling Punch, which starts with oleosaccharum, which is taking sugar and lemon peel and extracting the oils of the lemon peel and then turning that into basically a syrup. Tea, brandy, Jamaican rum, this would be appropriate for, orange liqueur, sparkling wine, and Angostura bitters.
Okay.
So it's where that funkiness is going to be this sort of shade inside a citrus forward light sparkling drink.
And then would you serve that over ice or no?
I would serve it with ice. So oftentimes that would, like traditionally, you'd put it in a punch bowl with a big block of ice.
Okay, so that is
And then
traditional.
you could serve it up.
Yep.
If it's cold.
Yep.
But if it's not cold, or whatever, like there aren't really hard and fast rules.
Yep.
I think pouring that over ice would be totally appropriate.
Yeah. So punch is really a bucket term. I mean, it encapsulates a category of.
I paused for bucket because that sent me to the college days.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Doesn't have to be made in a bucket.
Right. Could be.
It could be. But yeah, punch is batched. Even that's not in the definition, but punch is a drink that's featuring traditional elements that usually includes spices, botanicals, and citrus of some point.
Yeah.
And largely undefined.
Yeah. But rum would be the base in large part because the concept of a punch really came through the Caribbean, where that was the spirit that they would make locally.
Yes.
And all the other ingredients, like you say, that came along in that trade, your teas, spices, and some of the fruits that are native to that area would just really be the base for that thing.
Yes. Although I would say that whiskey punches, gin punches exist.
Sure.
And those spirits would sometimes find their way there.
Oh,
whiskey
sure.
was largely American. Rum was everywhere else. Gin's British. Like there's a Barbadian punch I'm including on this menu, which it's sort of ironic in that it's originated in Barbados, but was made by a Brit, kind of making a gin punch.
Yeah.
In contrast to the rum that surrounded him.
Right. Maybe he's tired of the rum punch or making a
just
statement.
Whatever. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. That's
and
hilarious.
so, but yes, predominantly rum is not required, but it is the predominant spirit.
That makes sense. No, this is a good one. I mean, like I said, the non-wine category of this tasting has now got a big shoes to fill because there are two that are, and again, we'll put links in the show notes to these products, assuming that you can find them which I think you can, which is awesome.
Yeah, you can.
And maybe they'll inspire you to, if not buy them,
I
but try
think
something
that
else.
both of them may require a visit. Certainly ethnology is going to require a visit to them.
Sure.
But the Dr. Bird is probably more available.
Awesome.
And I was just going to pardon my distraction here. I'm going to try to look up a menu.
All good. All good. Yeah. Well, I'll do some introduction while you're looking up menus.
Okay,
so
great.
Fred, so this is the segment that is, we call This Won't Pour. And I've sort of been evolving this segment a little bit too, just like the whole show. But the rule basically is, if anything that the TSA would allow through the security checkpoint is fair game, which does include ideas, but would not include beverages, although your ideas could have beverages baked into them, which I think some of the stuff you got coming up most certainly does, we've already talked about. So yeah, and I think the This Won't Pour segment is sponsored by Carrier Signal. Carrier Signal is an IT services provider specializing in small and medium businesses with unique needs. They handle everything from technology and security assessments, cloud migration, point-of-sale integration, and cloud-based phone systems. Learn more at www.carriersignal.com. In the lead-in, I mentioned that Fred is it technically your title, the executive director?
Executive director, yeah.
Of the Red Horse Center. And I think that the reason I paused in the beginning was I think technically your whole name is the Red Horse Center for Collaborative Leadership, correct? And they are right next door to us and do some unbelievable work. So why don't you just give us kind of that 10,000-foot view real quick of the organization, then we can jump into some of the specifics that are coming up.
So Red Horse Center is largely built around the idea of collaborating with horses to help people, whether that be through mental health and wellness, professional development, and other educational opportunities. We learn a lot about how to be and how to connect with other people by drawing lessons from the interactions with horses. And so my wife Ula and I have been doing this work for 20 some years. She's a psychologist and has a practice of providing mental health sessions, often collaborating with horses, for a long time. And in 2020, which sort of paralleled with me stepping down from the specific role of being at a beverage producer and wanting to advocate and educate more and provide a different sort of support for community as well as industry. And so we provide all those different services. And in 2020, we created a nonprofit so that we could raise money to make those services more available to more people and kind of help create equitable access to that.
Awesome.
So that's Red Horse Center.
Yep.
We have a physical location that's just across the street from Fen Valley. And individuals, groups, youth, adults all come out to take in different types of experiences.
Yeah, my main interaction is in part one of the things that we're going to talk about in a sec here, but also my kids go to Fenville Public Schools, and I know the school system is there all the time, and it's been a really cool partnership.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a program called Horses Empowering Youth, which is an umbrella that has about 4 different types of experiences for them, including youth and faculty, and that's been a very really inspiring relationship. And it's the horses can reach kids and adults, but especially in this case, they can reach kids and invite them to process things and come up with ideas about how they want to move forward in a way that sometimes adults can't.
Yeah, that's great. I heard amazing things about it from the people at Fenville Public, and it's great to have something that close to that school district that, I mean, it's literally around the corner essentially. And one of the things that you do and that we get involved in a little bit, and I know some folks will be listening to this and this will be relevant timing wise, and others who listen to this in, later on because of the way podcasts work, just know that these things happen all the time. So, again, go to the show notes and you'll see links to the Red Horse Center's website where they'll have what's coming up next for whenever you listen. But there's specifically to the timing of this show, you guys got a couple things coming up here pretty soon. Want to talk about them?
Yeah. So as a nonprofit, we try to find different ways to raise awareness and raise money. And so May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so the whole month of May will be in the Seen Through Horses support drive. And we have a few different events and opportunities to support. You can check that out at the overall you can either go to redhorse.red/donate or /events. But so the month of May is busy. We start out on May 3rd at Farmhouse Deli and Pantry in Douglas, a very well-loved establishment
fantastic.
run by Christine Ferris and her team. And so it's our second annual community table dinner there. So it's a paired dinner, like we were talking about, food and beverage pairing. And it's $80, and you'll get 5 courses. And then we'll be there to share stories of transformation from horses. And since we've already gone long, probably we are just finishing up the menu. So largely family style and paired with cocktails that are kind of inspired by this format. We have oyster ceviche with ginger, coconut, and Fresno chili. That's going to be with that Barbadian gin punch, which is gin, lime, and coconut water. We have a blackberry fennel salad with the Pier Cove sparkling punch I mentioned. We got grilled shrimp flambe that's going to be with this rum and oleo saccharum, which is a lemon oil that I talked about. A very simple, bright lemony drink. Whole roast lamb with red sangria. That will undoubtedly feature some Fen Valley products. Hawaiian ramen, which is Chris's take on ramen, and she connects to Hawaii quite a bit.
Yep.
And we're making an arak punch. Arak is a funky sugarcane rice spirit that I've never tasted before.
Okay.
But it's arriving this Friday, so I have time to figure out this cocktail.
You got a whole week to figure it out.
And then we're going to do a milk punch and espresso with a collection of desserts. So that's what's happening at Farmhouse.
That'll be awesome. That is May 3rd, right?
May 3rd.
Okay.
And then May 17th, we have our porch party.
That's your biggest event of the year? Or
Yeah,
no?
certainly.
Yeah.
Biggest fundraising event. And so that happens on our property. And we have herd visits that people can sign up for. We have food and beverage. We have a bar with local wines and beers and ciders. We have Farmhouse providing tacos. We have Crepes on the Lakes providing savory and sweet crepes. Palazzolo's gelato. We have live music featuring Great Lakes Brass, another one of my pursuits, as well as Red Horse Ramblers opening that up. I don't know what I've skipped, but
I'm looking at
we
the
have
thing. You
collaborative
did a good
art.
job. Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
And we have an artful auction, and we have a raffle. So there's all sorts of opportunities to engage, and it's a big fundraiser. And more importantly, it's an opportunity for people to visit and kind of get a feel for what it's all about. And the number of relationships that have been born at the porch party is really, I don't think I could count them anywhere. We have volunteers, we have clients, we have supporters, we have frequent visitors that oftentimes they're struck by the sense of lighthearted community that exists, and we like to say we're a peaceful place for powerful work.
That's a great slogan, and it is a cool venue. I've been to this event ever since it started. It is right next door to where I live and work, so it's an easy commute. But even if it wasn't, I would make my way there because it is such a unique environment, and it's a unique environment every day. But when you get that group of folks in there, you get the band playing, you've got Chris and her team doing the food. It just everything comes together. It's a lot of fun. It's the other thing I would say too is it's great for all ages because you've got some artwork that the kiddos can do. Yep. They can run around. It's a safe place for them to run around and get some energy out.
Some yard games for them.
Yep, it's just really, really neat. So no, we're looking forward to that and all the stuff that we've got coming up. And you can again learn more about that at redhorse.red, where you can learn about that and all the stuff that these guys are doing year round. Like I said, no matter when you listen to this, there'll be something on that website that you can attach yourself to. Yeah. No question about that.
Absolutely. It's a great opportunity to share our gratitude to you and Fen Valley Vineyards. We've been great neighbors for a number of years, and really, it's not an exaggeration to say without the support of Fen Valley Winery, Red Horse doesn't happen the way it's happened. So it's been a very collaborative and supportive relationship, and your current support means a lot, but really ongoing has been really valuable to us.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I can certainly say the same for this little podcast too. So it's a good community, and I'm glad to have you as one of our first guests because in a lot of ways, Fred actually sat down with me and helped me figure this whole thing out from the get-go. So we went to a local spot in Fenville for lunch, and he schooled me on all the things to buy and not buy just to get the nuts and bolts going. But more important than that was just talking through the process, because you don't really, until you have to answer someone else who's done it, questions about how you're going to do it, you don't even realize what you don't even know. And I know in a couple years, I'll look back on some of these first episodes and go, man, we sure did learn a lot. Yep. But I can tell you, I learned a lot more in that conversation with you over a 1 hour lunch than I did thinking about it for 6 months prior. So I really appreciate your help there. And I'm honored that you were willing to give up some time to be one of the first folks on this show. So
yeah, happy to do it.
Yeah. Well, that wraps another Poor Decisions. If you want to check us out or send us questions for AMA episodes or other things you want us to cover, craftpourdecisions.com is our website, and all the different social media platforms and podcasting platforms. We try to be on all of them. So other than that, we very much look forward to seeing you again. And thanks to Fred for coming out. Cheers.
Cheers.